Welcome to this week's episode of the Monocle Banking Podcast, brought to you by Monocle Solutions. The future of banking in South Africa is one of the most exciting spaces to play in at the moment. To call it dynamic would probably be the understatement of the decade. It's certainly exciting. We've got a host of agile new entrants with a differentiated value proposition, digital-first business models really focused on the monetization of customer insights, and they are competing head-on with the incumbent banks, which have also been really reinvigorated by new technology and are finding new and innovative strategies to better service you and I at the end of the day. And not all banks will succeed in this new environment, but those quickest to adapt will certainly benefit and capture, I think, a disproportionate share of the future banking market. Well, my guest this week understands this all too well, having led Nedbank's push into the cloud. Paul Morley, a globally recognized data leader in the financial services industry with almost 30 years of experience in IT and data, first with IBM and then Nedbank, as well as having the privilege to participate in many international data think tanks and conversations, has led and delivered over 3.5 billion rands worth of enterprise solutions ranging from South Africa to the Middle East and the UK, as well as the executive of Group Data Services at Nedbank. It's his responsibility to provide group-wide data services, including high-speed business intelligence, regulatory reporting, and data warehousing. Paul, that's quite an introduction. It's been a while. Hope you're well, my friend.
Thank you so much. I think the intro gives me more credit than I'm due. But as always, Michael, I think it's a privilege to talk to you about these new cutting-edge topics and seeing if we can shed some light and share some learnings for the greater audience.
Well, I know that is a passion of yours, is to shed light into some of the dark data spaces. But let's go all the way back so our audience better understands your journey, because you've got nearly 3 decades in the space. I don't want to make you feel old here, Paul. Years of experience. Your journey into the data field was somewhat accidental, wasn't it? Can you just share how you became involved in data and then in financial services?
Yes, going back 30 years, I must dig it out of the archives. Data for me was accidental for the most part. I tended to specialize through my earlier years in solving problems, if that's a simple way of putting it. And I grew up through IBM for many years. I was at IBM for, I think, almost 13 years. And sort of the pinnacle of that's where it started turning for me, is, I was put onto a sort of an international type SWAT team. And we were tasked, there were 6 of us, we were tasked to more or less go around the region and rescue problematic projects or problematic engagements at any dimension, be it financial, technological, or legal. And that sort of got me into the realm of systems integration. Back in the early days, integrating complex systems was very, very challenging. And we managed to do that quite successfully. And through that process of, integrating complex hybrid systems, eventually, the Nedbank reached out to me, and I think at the time I was in Dubai, and said they had a number of initiatives, systems integration orientated initiatives, and then obviously that leads into data. And before I knew it, I was in a position where I was sort of called upon on a regular basis to solve complex and problematic systems and programs within Nedbank. And through that process, as data became more and more leading edge topic, I spent pretty much all of my time in data, and that's how I got into it. So it was accidental for the most part. It wasn't something I actually sort of said I want to be in data, because if you have to ask me 25 years ago, who'd say, Paul, what do you think about data? I would say, it's a database. That's about as glorified as it gets. How interesting can data be? It's a database. It's a warehouse. It's a place where you store data. That's not very interesting. So really, I almost shied away from it, saying it's like potentially not worth the effort. It's like data. It's language to those people in the basement. That who wants to do that stuff? And it just so happened, it's the course of my journey, just data became more problematic. And before I knew it, I was involved in more and more data.
The value of that data, Paul, I mean, you say it was a warehouse, and one can almost liken it to a library that was sitting there with dust gathering on all of these books, and no one was pulling the books down from the shelves, reading them and saying, wait a minute, there's so much value in this library, in this data that we have, that we can now put to productive use. When did you see that shift happen in the approach to data? And, you go to every tech conference and they say data is the new oil or the new gold or whatever it is. When did that shift happen?
the minute you started getting more and more involved on digital-based technologies rather than your traditional-based channels and outlets and integrations. Then you started to see, as soon as you start going things like mobile, phone banking, internet banking, recently cloud, etc., as soon as you started getting deeper into the digital dimensions, you started to see people who did it right in the digital domain, where the integrations are relatively easier than your traditional legacy. They started to be more successful. And it really was a push from digital that made data important. That's the sort of perspective that I saw over the many years, is the closer you got to digital, digital all your documents, digitize your documents, don't keep your documents in files. As soon as you started applying masses of digital technology to obvious components of your business that were not inherently digital or digitized, you started to see the demand, because everybody now called the data instead of calling the document or the artifact that they were digitizing. So the further we went away from paper-based business processes, more into digital processes, you found more and more people talking about, can I have the data? Can I have that data? Can I have that digital document? Can I have this? And that's sort of in the early days. And I think that ties back into automation, because part of that process of digital and digitizing your business, you get the advantage of being digital and having it at your fingertips, and your integrations become easier. You could recall business processes quicker. You didn't have to suffer from business process that was manually defined. You now have these autonomous processes that helped automation. And I think, again, that is the sub-level behind the digital context. It was actually automation that also drove a lot of this, the demand for data, especially when the conversion of sort of paper-based processes swung to digital processes. You saw that pick up over and over a period of years.
It's fascinating to go back to your early career and overlay what you've just said about that transformation. Given where you started with IBM, and a lunch I was having with a banking executive who revealed to me that he said, Michael, you won't believe it, but one of our systems is still running on COBOL. And, the big challenge for banks was migrating away from this legacy coding language that was developed by IBM. COBOL was really it was the program in the 60s all the way through to the 80s, probably the most important of any industry at the time. And I think the big challenge for industry was then migrating away to other newer languages from COBOL, particularly in banking. Now, what did you see through your experience at IBM and into Nedbank as the big challenge in transforming the IT architecture, moving away from the COBOL legacy systems inside Nedbank?
Well, funny enough, we still have COBOL legacy systems. Today, it is a bit of a problem simply because of the skill sets. Okay, and let's not get ourselves confused between the skill sets and the technology itself. COBOL is still one of the most used applications in languages in banking. And in some sectors, it's really, really, really well entrenched. The fact still remains, COBOL as a language is still one of the most comprehensive, complete, stable, well-supported languages that we've got. So when you're changing from COBOL to a newer language, you need to ask yourself the question, why do you want to do that? And most answers I used to get was, because it's an old language, been around 20 years. That's fine. Of course it's been around 20 years. I mean, binary's been around for like 70 years. No one's thinking about binary. But COBOL seems to be an issue. So it is still a very flexible language. It is still a very easy integrated to language, and it's still a very comprehensive language. Okay, so I always ask the question, why do you want to change? Is it because there's a hype trail being spun up? Is there a new fad going down the environment? And I'm not necessarily saying COBOL, you should stay with COBOL. That's not my point. But it's always going to be a challenge, and it is always a challenge for some banks or some organizations, simply because of the fact that the way COBOL and the way they develop the COBOL and how it integrates into systems is far, far easier, far, far expansive and comprehensive in terms of logic and functionality than most other modern-day languages. In fact, if you wanted to replace a COBOL engine in an organization, you might need to use a combination of multiple languages just to cover the footprint of functionality and scope that your one application did. Okay, now that's because obviously today no one application or program will do everything. And so it does bring itself a level of complexity, especially when you want to decommission that language from your environment, is because now you might not need one language. You might need a combination of 2 or 3 languages just to cover the footprint that COBOL spans. So It's not an easy question to ask. That's why it's so difficult to sort of decouple COBOL in the modern context from your engineering systems, because it's not that easy to do anymore, simply because of the openness, the span, and the functionality of the application of COBOL itself. So not a very easy thing. I do think you do need to sort of move off and migrate from a COBOL platform. I think it's the right thing to do it, but again, that's going to be complex, because depending on how you deployed it, 2 or 3 applications are going to be needed just to replace one. And something that's been stable for 20 years with very little bugs, with very little issues, sometimes people don't want to inject that level of uncertainty in the environment when they swing to a new application, because these new applications spring up dime a dozen on a daily basis.
Yeah.
No one really thinks about testing them anymore. So it tends to be very problematic and painful. So this is why banks, for example, are not necessarily in a rush to remove the COBOL footprint from the organization, because it's very difficult to do and very complex to do, especially with newer products.
Oh, how have you done this at Nedbank? Given that, one of the consequences of the maturity of COBOL is, as you say, it can be challenging to find developers with the requisite experience working with COBOL. And so, you don't want to be struggling to maintain or update those legacy systems. And again, that can lead to reliability issues, security vulnerabilities. How have you approached this at Nedbank?
Well, I think we're still on our journey to moving our COBOL core applications from the bank, like our core banking and the stuff that sits on the mainframe. So we're still in that process, and it's a challenging one. I mean, Nedbank has been on its managed evolutionary journey. It's coming to the end now, and it's been going for about 7-8 years, and it's still a challenging one. And the guys are making, and this is the last hurdle. We are still chewing at the bit and finding challenges all over the place. So there's no silver bullet to this. It's a painful and lengthy, and because it's your core systems in a bank, that's not something you take with a pinch of salt. So you've got to just work through it. I mean, that's how we're dealing with it. You deal it as and when, because there's no silver bullet to this. And I don't think Nedbank, like all the other banks, I don't think necessarily we have a better way or a better approach than anybody else has on this, because we all suffer from the same problems. So it's a challenging thing to start off with. So, and that's the last sort of big hurdle we've got as a bank going into the new digital era, is now it's our time to start migrating those processes off into better looking technologies or better performing technologies.
What do those look like? What would be better suited than COBOL to be migrating towards, given that you've also, in terms of physical IT infrastructure, you've lifted and shifted most of your infrastructure to the cloud. What does that mean for you now? Because this move to the cloud has certainly transformed your data capabilities and unlocked opportunities for the banks. But what does this mean in terms of migrating away from COBOL?
I don't even think we've got an answer for that yet. I think we're still wrapping our heads around what does it look like and how we're going to do it. I don't even think we've got the end state or target state answer for that question, to be honest, Michael. I know there are a couple of things still under wraps in the bank, and a couple of processes and a couple of approaches we are looking at. And there are different technologies we are looking at in our sort of core banking space, but I don't think that's finalized yet. So I can't give out too much information, because I think there's still a number of processes and RFPs and proofs of concept out there. But all I can say is it's not an easy challenge, and it changes daily. We've had to change tact on our core a number of times to face the wind. So this is a very volatile space at the moment. From an industry perspective, It's a very volatile space. It's not even just a volatile space from a bank anymore. So we've certainly had to change the direction of our ship a number of times as we try and navigate to the path we want and the solution in terms of outcome we need. So it's not an easy journey, and it's one fraught with minefields because of the integration complexities, because of the changing market, because of the changing technologies and the rapid change in technologies. And on the other side of the coin, there's a lot of fly-by-nights. We've also found a lot of fly-by-night organizations and software platforms that profess a lot but deliver very little, because this is a very competitive space in the technology domain.
Yeah.
So you also find a lot of not too favorable solutions and providers in the space. So it's a very difficult one. It's not something that you'd want to run into blindly. It's something that we've tried to manage over a number of years to various degrees. And that included changing paths.
Yeah, I mean, and it's balancing that often conservative nature of regulatory compliance, which is built into the DNA of banks. And I often say, one of the first rules of banking is always say no, or first say no,
Yes.
because, it's just you're dealing with depositors' savings here. They have deep systemic impact through economies. And then you've got this need for innovative data practices as well. So there is this balance. Let's maybe focus on the cloud. How has the move to the cloud transformed Nedbank's data capabilities, and what sort of opportunities has this unlocked for the bank?
Well, we're still in the last back end of our migration, so we haven't totally finished yet. Obviously, that was a 4-year journey, but certainly it's given us a lot of flexibility. And I think in today's digital world, flexibility and mobility of data is exceptionally important. How quickly can you get data from one place to another within the bank through its automated processes to make the right decision? And I almost talk about real-time decisioning, okay? In a way, it's real-time decisioning, in a way, it's not, because I don't believe real-time decisioning actually exists unless you've got real-time analytics, okay?
Yeah.
And vice versa. Can't have real-time analytics if you don't have real-time decisioning, because then, what's the point? So it does give us a lot of flexibility, certainly within the demands of our internal businesses and external business partners. It does give us the flexibility to operate very, very quickly without hard coding, without tightly coupled integration, etc. So it certainly gives us a lot of flexibility in that space. Okay, from our data world, and even our regulators are moving to the cloud. And when that happens, when they completed their cloud initiatives, that makes us interacting with the regulator far easier, far more agile, far more real time. And obviously that also brings advantages to some level from a regulatory reporting. Could be some disadvantages, but it certainly is going to allow us that agility. And those are the things we are looking for in the cloud, because I've always said a cloud is nothing more than just another data center. So if we go cloud, you must really think about the cloud from a perspective of what does the cloud bring you in a capability that you never had if you ran your own data center.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So if you're only going to get what you get out of the cloud that you would get out of a data center that you would manage or
Not
own,
worth it.
then the cloud is no value. But
Yeah.
So you've got to look at, for me, it's about our perspective. It's about going to the cloud must bring you a definitive set of new capabilities that you never had before. Then there's value. And that high level of automation and data mobility, as well as being able to couple with other applications very quickly, is a capability we never had if we had done our own data center. So those are some of the advantages we get. The other side of the coin is it allows us to manage things like our risk processes and our risk regulatory obligations closer to the front line, and the front line being the channel or the edge, cloud edge, or the closest point Nedbank can get to its customer through a channel.
Yeah.
So it allows us to do a lot more risk and regulatory monitoring earlier, right up front, as close to the cloud edge as possible. That takes the pressure off the back office, because traditionally, as data came into an organization, it will flow through the organization, flow through the enterprise, and land up in a back office somewhere where some guy did some reports and the validations, and then it'll flow all the way back from the back end to the front end for a credit approval, as an example. It will flow up and through the organization. Here, we can actually start doing things a little bit more real time on the edge, on the phone itself. So
Yeah.
if we were on phone banking and I wanted a loan, I could do a loan on the phone and it would give me approval right there and then, rather than filling out a form and waiting for it to go into credit approval in the back end and coming back in a day later. You can. So you can start doing risk management, risk mitigation earlier, as close to your frontline interaction points to your customer, be it a cell phone, be it a web page, be it whatever system. So it allows that. That's where the scale of economy comes in, and really that's what customers are looking for. They're looking for rapid response, real-time response. They're looking for instant ratification in terms of, I ask a question, they want an answer now, not tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it allows us to overcome those hurdles.
Yeah, that's real value.
Better client experience.
Well, exactly. And I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the holy grail here as well. You've been at the really sharp edge of leading these kinds of big projects for several years now. And if you look at the numbers, I think it was a Gartner figure that I saw that 87% or so of big data projects fail. In your experience, yes, what are if you look at the macro elements, be it data availability, skill set, time frame, organizational readiness or just the political environment, which I guess could also be, to some extent, organizational readiness or culture, which of those is most often neglected or underestimated in data projects?
Leadership. Leadership is one of the biggest causes. So if I look out of those stats you're talking about around why massive data programs fail, they fail on three dimensions. They fail on people, they fail on technology, and they fail on culture. Okay, one of those three things are going to be the cause of your program's downfall. Okay, out of all three of them, technology is the one that causes the least problems.
Yeah.
Where most people, technology is the cause of the majority of data. Actually, technology is the least of the three. The first comes with people. Your people, or should I say leadership, is a dimension within the people piece, but it's generally leadership. Leaders don't necessarily understand that you can't run cloud or database projects the same way as you normally run projects. So the leadership styles that apply to these massive programs generally impede them. Like I said, you can't build a data center in the cloud. The analogy I used earlier, if you build a data center and you put one in the cloud, you have to have more than just what you had on-prem. You've got to have a capability that you didn't have or don't have. Then it's worthwhile. And that goes to leadership and people as well. So leadership don't understand how to build highly scalable, forward-thinking data strategies because they don't understand data. You must remember, and I'm saying this is a point in time. It's certainly, leadership over years when it comes to data is a very big focal point, and people are getting better at data leadership. But generally, it's the leadership style or directional strategies you try and deploy, because you can't use the same techniques in strategic planning, in leadership direction as you would normally do, because data is intangible. Okay, it's not a tangible thing. It's an outcome of something. It's a product of something.
Yeah.
So where typically our leaders used to manage the thing that produces, they manage the machines, they manage the organization. Managing the things that produce stuff is one thing. Managing the outcome and the intangible, totally different set of leadership skills. Totally different required perspectives on what does that mean for an organization. Because when they say data is the gold, data is the oil, etc., what is it? Because data, when they call data an asset, and this is a challenge most people have, they say data is an asset. Yes, but an asset is not it's not an asset in the traditional sense that you've got an asset and a liability on a general ledger.
It's an intangible.
You don't find data as an asset on a general ledger. Okay, so you can't manage it the same way as you manage an asset and a liability. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I just want to understand a little bit more deeply, what are the critical leadership skills then that you've had to acquire or have come to the surface that you found invaluable in managing a more outcomes, output-based type of project, such as a data project with its intangible nature?
Well, I think one of the skills you need to learn, and I think you've just summarized it on the tip of the iceberg here, is you've got to worry and you've got to understand more, and it's got to be more appropriate for you to understand the outcome than managing the process. Most people want to manage the processes. They want to manage the organization, the structures, the processes, how it moves, how it's created, etc. Where at the end of the day, what you need to focus on in terms of skills is how do you manage the outcome, the result of. What does that result mean? Give you an example, and you've got to reverse. It's almost a polarity in thinking. Let me give you an example. The easiest example I can think of is, people say, oh, Paul, you've got bad data. Your data is inaccurate. It's incomplete. Actually, data never lies. Data is always 150% correct. The fact that you don't like the outcome of what you're seeing in the data doesn't make the data bad. What it makes is your process for generating and managing that data bad. What does that mean? If I walk into an organization and say, Paul, do an evaluation of my organization. I'm going to use this as another analogy because sometimes it's difficult to explain it. So I'll walk into an organization and they say to me, Paul, is this organization healthy? And we look at the balance sheet, we look at the assets, we look at the processes.
Yeah.
The first thing I would do is go and look at the data. Is the data representative of the organization? Is it accurate? Is it well maintained? Is it complete? Does it have lineage? Do I know where this data is coming from? If I can't tell you those things, if I cannot confirm those things, like your data is inaccurate, why is your data missing? Why don't you have a backup of your data? Why is your data inaccurate? Why is your data out of synchronicity to your systems? Why is it only updated every 24 hours instead of real time? That tells me the health of your business, because that data that I'm looking at is a direct representation of what your organization is producing on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. And if your data is wrong, well, they say it's wrong. I say it's absolutely correct because it's a mirrored reflection of the health of your organization.
Wow, you are your data as an organization. I love that. And
you understand that concept,
yeah,
Mike? So
yeah.
I often have these debates with data quality. Oh, Paul, is bad data. Keep saying to them, there is no such thing as bad data.
Yeah.
It's an accurate reflection of whatever is producing it. So if you don't like the data, there's a problem in your processes.
Yeah. We can't we can't anthropomorphize something that doesn't have feelings or is not being self-directed. It's being directed by outside forces, and those are the forces inside the organization. And we've got to look at those and say, why are those forces producing these results? And it's a great way of reverse engineering the question. Paul, I've got to ask you as a concluding question. We're going to have you back on the podcast soon because there's so much more to talk about, but we're nearing the end of our time. We've got so many emerging technologies, and AI obviously has been just completely overdone, in my opinion. I saw a toothbrush with AI on the label the other day, and I thought, no, come on. We've got blockchain, we've got the cloud that we obviously spoke about. What are the emerging technologies that you believe will have the most significant impact on banking in the next 5 years, and why?
Okay, what are the big ones for me? There's large language models and small language models. I think those two things in conjunction are going to have the biggest effect on banks going forward for a number of reasons. So that's the first piece of AI that I think is going to play a large role in banking. The next component I see is what they call embedded AI. Embedded AI is about AI that's embedded in devices. Okay, so it doesn't rely on anything. I'm talking things like Siri on Apple iPhone, where it does communicate to the back end. It's back end, Apple, wherever in the world.
Yeah.
But it's embedded AI. It's AI that's embedded into a piece of technology, okay? That's hard-coded into a piece of technology.
I've got to stop you on that point because I've actually just started using a new smartphone called the Magic V2 by Honor, which has AI embedded at the device hardware level.
Yes.
So it's not just download an app and and it's incredible the intuitive manner in which it's learnt my charging habits, my app usage habits, what to put up when. And it's like it kind of understands me more than probably my partner understands me at the moment. It's scary, Paul, how this AI can learn.
Yes. And for me, that's one of the biggest game changers in terms of affecting things like banking. And that will not just banking, by the way, it's going to impact us dimensionally on a number of different fronts. And that is and to your point, hardwired embedded AI in devices. You'll start seeing a lot more of that come through from your fridges. Okay. A very good use case for embedded AI would be a fridge that's got different zones within it that can cool things at different, depending on what type of vegetable. And again, vegetables give off, as an example, I don't want to get too into it, but it gives off various gases when it starts deteriorating. So it can differentiate, the AI can differentiate between a bag of apples that are going off and a bag of carrots that are going off and change the respective temperatures in different zones of a walk-in freezer to cater or minimize or slow down the process of deterioration. It's things like that. So you'll get more and more use cases. I mean, I don't even want to get into vehicles and cars and trucks and all that where it can do, because that's blatantly obvious.
Yeah.
But I do think you're going to see a lot more of this embedded, hardwired AI in devices.
Paul Morley, it's been a truly enlightening chat. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to have to leave it there. Great insights into the complexities of data management and I think the ongoing transformation, I should say, in the banking sector, because quite clearly there is still some work to be done. I think the bottom line, though, is that it requires a combination of a different kind of leadership and curiosity in the space to help drive success in this domain. So look forward to having you back on the show in the not too distant future, where we can share a little bit more about some of those lessons that you've learned and the scars that you wear like badges along the way. Take care.
Thank you very much, Michael. Always a pleasure.
And as always, to our listeners, we hope today's conversation with Paul Morley has given you a deeper understanding of what it takes to navigate the intricate world of data in large banking institutions, the balance between compliance and innovation, and the importance of leadership in cultural transformation. Thanks for joining us on the Monocle Banking Podcast. Make sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the fascinating world of finance with other leading professionals. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep innovating. Goodbye for now.